Creating a character for a video game can be a really important step into developing incredible stories and creating fantastic gameplay experiences. But where do you even begin? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to create a character biography. Hi, I'm Ree, and welcome to Dev Talk and Tea. So first on the agenda, as always, tea break. What are we drinking today? I opted for a decaf, a nighttime tea. What is it? Was it a Yorkshire tea? A Yorkshire tea nighttime tea with like vanilla and cinnamon or nutmeg or some sort of goodness like that. So we're going for something a little bit cozy today, even though it is still very warm outside. Before we begin, today I'm just going to go through one example of how to create a character biography for video games, and I believe what I'm going to show you incorporates some best practices for developing characters. There are plenty of other ways to create your own character biography. Feel free to use this as a starting point, but continue to develop your own style and learn from others. So what is the point of a character biography? Before we get stuck in, I think it's important to understand what a character biography should achieve. And for me, it boils down to two things: effectively communicating the details of a character to anybody on the development team, not just your narrative team, and potentially being used as a tool to help casting if your game needs actors. So we want a very clear and also a uniform piece of documentation to be a reference to absolutely anybody who wants to learn more about the character. That could be somebody in the development team, that could be your art team who need to understand more about the character to draw them, it could be your gameplay team who want to understand more about the character to create a cool boss scenario using that character, and of course it could be any actors that are looking to portray your character. The detail in character biographies can vary depending on the depth of the story that you're telling, the length of your game or your story, how involved the characters are in your game, and also the resources that are available for you to develop your characters, create characters, and tell the story that you want to tell. There are some incredible, memorable characters that are incredibly detailed, but also there are some incredible, memorable characters in video games that have very little detail but are still massive staples within the video game space. A character bio is just the first step in developing a character, but it sets the groundwork for everything that comes after to bring that character to life. So, without further ado, let's hop into a character bio that I made earlier. That feels very Blue Peter. Okay, so this is VoiceOver Rianne here, and we're currently looking at a character sheet I made earlier. This is based off of my Dungeons & Dragons character from my last campaign. She is very lore heavy, as it was a 3.5-year campaign, so this character biography reflects the fact that there's a lot of story and she has a lot of lore involved with her character. So what we're going to do is I'm going to flip between my pre-made lovely character sheet here filled in for my character here, Vala Briarheart, and also flip between the template. Now, both of these will be accessible via the description below. These are templates that you can just download or use for free on Google Drive, and I'll make these available as templates for you to use at your own discretion. So, we'll start here on the template version, and we've got name. Very, very obvious. Kicking it off with the hard stuff, I know. But underneath, we've got 3 keywords. Personally, I like to make character sheets, or character bios rather, as accessible as humanly possible to somebody who does not want to be on this piece of documentation for long. So if a coder wants to jump in and they've got no real invested time to know exactly what Vala would eat for breakfast every single morning, they can get a quick view of this character very easily, very quickly, just by looking at the first few chunks of the character biography. So they don't need to read through tons and tons of pages to understand the character. So let's hop over to Vala then. So Vala here, I've written down 3 key words that describe her character: loyal, out of her depth, and determined. Now, these can be really useful to lay out all of your characters next to each other. If you use words like they're kind, they're friendly, they're nice, they're boring words. I would argue, in fact, maybe loyal might be a boring word, but that's actually quite a prominent virtue within Vala's characteristic, which is why it's one of the keywords. But a very handy thing to do is when you've got all of your cast of characters laid out together, you look at all of their 3 words, you can easily pick out the weaknesses and the similarities between the characters, because the last thing you want to do is have a cast of characters that are all loyal and they're all determined and they're all brave. So it's a really handy thing to be able to look at that all together and see how different and how varied your characters are, because obviously we want a nice, fun, diverse cast of characters. Okay, next we have what is, again, some very basic information. We're looking at age, we're looking at gender, we're looking at origin, which I'll circle back to, and we're looking at ethnicity. Very easy to get your head around. So for Vala, she is 80 years old but presents as 24 because of her origin, which we'll get to. Her gender is female, and she's also female presenting, just in case those 2 things are different, because some characters might be. Origin. Now, we have origin and ethnicity because this is a high fantasy setting where elves exist and dwarves exist. That's not an ethnicity. However, it is an important part of this world building. So Vala is a sun elf. An ethnicity, this is the real world ethnicity. So whilst in this world, ethnicity might not be, a thing, origin might be the thing, we need to ground it in reality. We're working in the real world, and the ethnicity is important for character art to decide what they look like, for the proper representation to be had, for actors if your character needs acting work. So ethnicity here is that she is Caucasian. You might want to go into more detailed about description about where your character is originally from, if they're based in the real world, like they're Caucasian and they are British, they're Irish perhaps, etc, etc. So another thing we have here is the picture. I have just chosen Galadriel from Rings of Power just here as a reference, but when you start your character sheet, do not feel like you need a picture straight away. The way that a character development process might work is that you're creating this character sheet for your art team to then go away and use that as a base to develop your character. Your character team might have already started sketching out a few ideas and you want to attach it here, but ultimately your character biography is not a one and done. It is what we like to call a living or a working piece of documentation. You will not go ahead and write this out in one sitting and you'll never touch it again. You will come back to it constantly with updates based on the decisions of the story that you're going to be making, based on the decisions of how your character might look or act as you develop your game. So feel free to come back and put a picture in at a later date. You do not have to have it straight up. Okay, so let's go back over to the template and we're going to be talking character references here. Character references specifically describe your character's personality. This bit can trip people up, because people might look at character references and they might think of the visual references and the audible references of these characters. But you need to make it very clear that what we have here are personality references. The reason why I like to use references, and this will not be the first time that I use this in these documentation, is that it helps people, again, get a very clear and quick idea what this character should be like, act like, perform like. So hopping back over to Vala here, I have chosen 3. I like to work in 3, as you can probably tell by the keywords at the top. I also like to work in 3s here for character references. It's a nice variation. If you find that you can't find 3, or maybe you have 4, that's absolutely fine, but 3 is just a nice number. So for here, I've written Starfire from Teen Titans, Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones, and Grog from Vox Machina, all with distinctive character traits. Some of them have some similarities, others don't. But what is also important, in fact, more important than the actual characters themselves, are the keywords that you're going to choose to pick out of these references specifically. So for Starfire, the reason why she is a reference is because she is powerful yet naive. For Brienne, she's loyal, reserved, and a trained fighter. And for Grog, he's strong and has a good heart. And the way that these characters represent these traits are important in understanding how your character is going to act. Now lastly, on the sort of quick fire round, which is the top half of the first sheet, I like to add tropes to avoid. Tropes to avoid, here we go, I've put it in the wrong place here, but These are notes for any tropes or negative stereotypes to avoid. Now, of course, I would like to assume that anybody looking at this character sheet would avoid any negative stereotypes and avoid harmful tropes. But the reality is some people aren't aware of some of these things. It doesn't necessarily have to be horrifically bad things I'm talking about. It could be something as simple as what I've added here to Vala, which is the strong but dumb character, right? Grog is actually an excellent example of the trope, strong but dumb. And whilst we've used Grog as an example, we're selecting references here as to why we like Grog as a character that isn't because he's dumb. But we have referenced up here Starfire because she's naive. There is a very clear difference to me between naive and dumb. To some people, that will be the same thing. So in order to avoid that, I will like to highlight any potential things to trip up on, tropes, stereotypes, just to make sure that anybody who reads this sheet is very clear what we're trying to achieve here and what we want to avoid. Okay, so this is like the quick fire round, right? But now we're going to go into things that have a little bit more meat to the bones. And right now we're going to start with something quite fun, to be honest. It's physical appearance. Now, the aim of physical appearance isn't to dictate your art team at all, but here we want to describe the character's physical appearance as it pertains to the narrative and describe key features of physicality. So we want to highlight specific physical traits of this character that are important to the characterization and to the plot and to the character's lore. So you don't want to be going ahead and dictating every single aspect of how your character looks, but you want to give a good idea, a concept of how the character looks in your mind, but more importantly, why from a narrative perspective. So let's read here. So Vala is a sun elf from the southern forests of Eliongelis. Like most sun elves, she is tall, standing at 6'1", with a lean yet muscular build from years of training. So instantly, we have a lot of lore within this particular description. Like most sun elves, we can ascertain that sun elves are mostly tall, standing around 6'1". We can guess that the origin of the sun elf is going to be usually tall. And then also, she must be lean and muscular from the years of training. Also common with sun elves is that she has tattoo markings across her body that glow when she harnesses her strength from the sun. Again, we're only identifying this because it is very important within her origin and important within her particular capabilities as sun elf. She uses the sun to harness strength, and the way we can visually represent that is through tattoos and markings across her body. Her hair is long, though often braided or pushed back out of her face so it does not impede in fighting. This kind of leans more towards a suggestion, which you're free to do. However, once again, I stress, do not dictate to your art team what they should or shouldn't do. You might take this to your art team and your art team might actually do a fantastic, incredible job. I mean, they usually do, but take it in a completely different direction. And you might like that even more than the idea of having braided hair pushed out of her face. She might have it in a completely different way and you prefer it. She has long pointed ears and opts for lighter armor for better agility. She always carries a trusty elven halberd and magical shield, and she wears a ring on a chain around her neck from her respected mentor as a keepsake. Some of these again are a little bit more suggestive. Some of these feel a little bit more ingrained in the lore, i.e. the keepsake and potentially the magical shield and the elven halberd. For things like weapons, let's assume that this is a video game that's an RPG and has a lot of weaponry going on. You'd want to check with your gameplay team that the weapons that you are suggesting are actually feasible. Because there's no point writing in wonderful, she has cool halberds and magical shields when that's not even an option to be added within the game. So a great point here to collaborate with the rest of your design team. So let's dive a little bit deeper and we're going to go over the overview. Kind of makes it self-explanatory, but it's going to be a brief overview of the character, their background and their story through the game. Do not be afraid to add spoilers here. I think it's very natural for a lot of people when they write, especially when they're starting to establish their character, to almost not spoil anything for people to continue reading. You want to make sure that this document is as spoilerific as possible because everybody needs to understand everything that's going to happen with this character. Do not be afraid of spoilers. But the overview is kind of like a brief blurb into your character, and it's specifically your character's plot or whatever is important with this character throughout the game. So here we have Vala is a young, in elven years, aspiring warrior from the forests of Eliongalis. Her parents are either dead or missing after they were branded traitors and left the forest when she was born. Since then she has been raised by the Lady of the Forest, Lady Sessamaria, name drop there, so important character, who always kept her at arm's length. Vala has been at the mercy of her people for 80 years, as she is the daughter of traitors and has been desperate to prove her worth. On the day for adventure... What that's meant to be one day, I will briefly change that. One day, 4 adventurers enter the forest. She jumps at the opportunity to help. With Lady Sessamaria's blessing, she leaves Eliongalis for the first time in her life on an adventure to save the world with her newfound friends. So, I know I just mentioned make this as spoilerific as possible. However, we are going to go into more depth on this bit as we progress through this character biome. So this does act like a blurb, but yeah, we will continue to add more depth, more layers as we get further and further down the page. Again, just bearing in mind that when people reading it, they can get 1, 2, 3, 4, they might stop at the overview and go, I don't need to know what happens in Act 1, at least not for today. I understand what this character is now, who this character is now, so I'm going to leave it. Ideally not. Ideally, everyone in the team will read every piece of documentation. But that's not, it's not usually the case, and that's okay. So now, what we have is we're assuming that this particular game has a story that's broken up into 3 acts. This might not be the case. In your game, it might be easier to separate your character's plotline through levels. It might be easier to just have one big block of text because your game is relatively short and it doesn't need to have so many subtitles, it doesn't need to go into so much detail. But for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to assume that it's split into 3 neat acts, which is quite common. 3 or 5 is usually quite common, but not always the way. So what we do in each act is we're wanting to describe the key plot that's specifically pertaining to the character in this particular act. So it's okay to go into other details of other things that are happening throughout the game, but what we want to do in a character biography is make sure we distill it and put as much detail into this particular character plot. You have other documentation that can facilitate and describe and develop the overarching plot of the game. I would keep it separate and keep this completely focused to the character where possible. Also, something that I like to add under each section is a goal, an obstacle, and the character arc. So at the beginning of this act, what is the character's goal? So it gives a very clear objective, what the character wants to do within that act. Not only does that help with maybe specific gameplay objectives, but it also helps with directing the character's motivations throughout the story of the game. Same with the obstacle. It's a far more interesting story and a more interesting experience if the character has an obstacle to overcome. Again, this might be an objective for you as a player, your playable character, to help with, to have an objective, but it could just also be a personal growth that eventually they overcome, or maybe they don't, but it creates a far more in-depth and interesting character to make sure that they have some sort of obstacle that they need to get through, overcome, or even fail at. And lastly, we have an arc. Again, looking into more interesting characters, giving them a character arc. This could be per section, it could just be overall for the entire game. It might not be as detailed as having a character arc split into 3 parts, it might just be 1, but having a very clear arc of where your character starts and where they end can create much more riveting, exciting, interesting character dynamics within the story, therefore within the video game. Let's go back to Vala. I will not read all 3 of these. I will let you read these in your own time. So let's just read Act 1 so you understand an example here. Vala fights off a swarm of shadow entities and saves a lost group of adventurers who are trying to find the Lady of the Forest. After learning that an old enemy she defeated long ago has returned, she decides to let Vala join the group of adventurers to put the monster back where it came from, giving Vala her ring as a protection talisman. Vala begins to learn about the outside world, from the good to the disgusting. Despite the chaos of it all, she learns everything about Hiroshia and becomes fast friends with her new companions. So her goal, when we meet her in Act 1, at the beginning of the game, let's say, is that she wants to prove her worth. As we've learned earlier, that she has spent 80 years trying to find her place and prove her worth, because she has parents that are traitors and everyone looks down on her. So this is a great opportunity for her to prove her worth. Her obstacle is the fact that she is branded as a traitor's daughter, so that's what stopped her from going out. You could also argue that an obstacle here is that she's never been outside of the forest before, and now she will be. That could be a second obstacle if you wanted. And the arc here is that she is naive about the world. Vala takes her first steps into learning about the world outside. So she begins those first steps from starting as this sort of naive, wide-eyed, adventurer, to now beginning to understand all of these disgusting new things about Hiroshia and everything that's going on with this old enemy that she's never been allowed to see before. So we have that in Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. As I said, feel free to read this in your own time if you would like. I will not put you through this right now because it is quite long, but you want to go into as much detail as you can without it being too heavy. There's a balance here between as much detail as needed, but also as light as you can make it while still having the detail. You don't want people to be reading tens and tens of pages of backstory because people will not remember it. It will just go in one ear and out the other. Some people really enjoy that stuff. I'd say for the purpose of a character biography, it wants to be as sleek as you can, but whilst having a lot of detail, the most important detail to understanding your character. So, let's say we've gone through and written everything, all your character arcs, everything that your character is going to go through throughout the entire game. I have some optional additional steps you can put in your character biography. You don't need to do these. In fact, this whole template is here for you to modify to your heart's content. These are just some suggestions that you could add if you wanted to, extra steps to help identify your character a little bit better, to make it easier for other people to kind of get on board and understand your characters. So right here we have key relationships, relationship with the story themes, that's your character's relationship with the story themes, and wants, needs, and flaws. So let's start with key relationships. Here you can bullet point a list of characters through the game and give each one a brief description of the character's relationship with the character in the biography. So for Vala, we have Lady Sessamaria, who is a mentor figure who raised Vala. They have mutual respect for one another, though the Lady of the Forest always seems to keep her at arm's length. We have Quiffy Twinkletoes, Vala's best friend after meeting her by chance after being attacked by shadow creatures in the forest. And we have Mephistopheles, who is a fallen angel who Vala vows to return to the Hells or kill, whichever comes first. This can be as extensive or as brief as you want. It does not have to be every single character in the game because your character may not know every single character in the game. You might just want to highlight the key relationships, or you may want to establish at least the relationships that are the most prominent within, like have the most prominent screen time that your player is going to see more often. The next one we have is the relationship of your character with the story themes. This might not be applicable, but what this does help do is tie in the reason your character exists in this story and in this video game. So the theme of your story, which let's assume that you've gone away and you've got documentation about your narrative for the game in a separate documentation, and the main theme of your story is about, overcoming the difficulties of love, because love conquers all. I don't know, something. Let's just do something very generic. How does your character tie in with those themes? I would argue that the more closely you can tie in your characters with your overarching story theme, the stronger characters you're going to get out of it, because your story and your characters are going to directly bounce off of each other. Rather than it feel like your characters kind of being forced into this world, they are a very well thought out piece of the world building itself. So here for Vala represents the theme unlikely heroes. So let's say that this game is a story about unlikely heroes saving the world. So she represents the theme of unlikely heroes, as the story focuses on her being a fish out of water. Despite not knowing the world beyond her home, she dedicates her time to learning the ways of different people and helping them with loyalty, compassion, and her big halberd. So this is how she contributes to the overarching story and the bigger story themes. Again, that just might help bounce the two off of each other and make it feel more harmonious when you continue to develop your story and your world building around these characters. And lastly, something quite straightforward is a want, a need, and a flaw. Sometimes this is depicted as a triangle. So a want at the top, a need at the bottom, and a flaw at the bottom. It doesn't matter which way around you put it, but this gives you another quick snapshot. Again, this might be something that you want further up the page if you want to add it in with sort of the quick snapshotty section of the biography. But this just gives you a quick look into your character's want, their need, their flaw. So for Vala, her want is acceptance, but her need is freedom, and her flaw is that she is naive. You may find that you want to do one of these for each level or act, as it might change throughout the course of the story, but it's just there as another tool for you to use if you find it helpful. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, another use for a character biography is for it to be shared with actors who may portray your character in a video game. So what I like to do is, in the bottom half of a character biography, is to create what is essentially a casting pack to be used for actors. So when you go out for casting calls, an actor and a vendor, whoever you might use to cast your game, can take this as a casting pack, understand the character by reading all their biography, but then also look at their vocal profile, any references that you might have, and a casting script. So first is vocal profile. This usually is similar to what we have at the beginning of the character biography, however, not always. So it's very important to distinguish your character profile versus the vocal profile, because it might be completely different, and here is a great chance to also specify some further details about the vocal profile specifically. So the vocal range, age range, that could be different to your age of your character. Similarly with the gender. Accent, you may be open to more than one accent for your character. It might be that in your mind you are happy and open to hear actors portraying your character with a British accent and an American accent. This just highlights the accents that you're open to hearing, or maybe you just have one accent in mind. It's completely up to you. And extra vocal qualities, so any distinct vocal qualities that your character has or you can imagine your character having. So with Vala, the age range here is mid to late 20s. We want a female sounding voice. We want a British RP. RP stands for received pronunciation, which is kind of like the quote-unquote standard British accent. Again, you can put, I don't know, London. No, probably not detailed enough. But you but there you go. Birmingham, UK, just in case there's another Birmingham across the world. And then vocal qualities here, I've put medium range. So something that is not too high, but not too low. Can be softly spoken, but can also turn on an authoritative tone. Other things you might want to add here are things like if they've got a lot of gravel to their voice, if they're raspy, if they're super high pitched, if this character maybe has a stutter or a lisp, or anything that you can kind of audibly hear can help cast the character. And underneath here we also have some vocal references. Again, completely different to the top, where we've got your character profile references. These should only be about the voice, what you want your character to sound like. I just have 2 here. Again, feel free to add probably max of like 4 or 5. You don't want to overwhelm them. But conveniently enough, the 2 references I have here are Galadriel from Rings of Power and Arwen from the Fellowship of the Ring. So very thematically on point, but however, that doesn't usually happen. It could be actors. You want to highlight references of actors rather than characters. It could be characters from shows, other games, films, audiobooks, D&D podcasts, you name it. I've used so many different ways of vocal referencing. It doesn't have to be just characters or exclusively characters. You can mix and match just to make sure it's easier. And lastly, we have some sample dialogue or voice sample work. So basically, we're going to want to share some scripts for auditions. Now, if you're amazing and incredible and ahead of the curve, you might have already started writing a script. However, that's not always the case, and in fact, often it's not the case, and that's okay. Casting scripts don't have to be taken straight from final scripts at all. What you do want to do, in my opinion, is focus on giving an actor some variety to bounce off of. So we just don't want to have the same kind of lines over and over again for them to audition with. We want to find distinct tones of your character's voice, distinct emotions, and also, when we're casting, we want to hear actors' range and the differences that they can perform. So let's look at Vala's again. So what we've got here is I've got, I believe, is it four different lines? I usually go for 5, but I've just done 4 for here. I've got a suggested direction, which is basically giving the scene context for this particular line. We have a traditional script format, which I recommend everybody use if you don't already use. So we've got the name of the character. We've got the parenthetical, which again, I typically use to try and give context to this particular line in the scene. And then we've got the script. So, for instance, we've got Vala is in the chambers of Lady Sessamaria. She has just been told she will be joining the group of adventurers to stop an evil outside the forest. Vala is excited to finally have an opportunity to prove herself. In these directions, you do not need to go into loads of detail. Okay, people can scroll up and read further detail if they want to remind themselves of why this would happen in the first place, because there's context of that written above, but don't again weigh down too much detail here. You just kind of want to get to the point and give a little bit of flavor, but also you don't want to over direct, because you want to give an actor the space to perform, to breathe, and to interpret each of these scenes and each of these moments. So then we have Vala keeping her composure. I'm not going to act. I can try. I'm not an actor. My lady, if you are sure, then I shall make preparations and leave on your command. I swear to you, I will fell this evil and bring honor to our lands. So somebody goes and does that. Wonderful. Someone goes and does that, but better. Very much highly likely, because that was awful. But as we carry on, we've got 4 distinct lines that show 4 distinct emotions. So here we've got kind of like a neutral, how we're here. Most of the time we're going to hear Vala in this sort of tone. The second one is more enthusiastic, something a bit more jovial. Down here we've got something that is very angry, and down here we've got something that is very sad and also angry, but we've got a different range of emotions here to really try and hear the character. The other great exercise about doing this is, as a writer, you get to find the writing voice. So it's great to hear an actor interpret these lines, but it's also very helpful beforehand to really land that tone of voice as you're writing the character. And this is a nice little way to check in and warm up and begin to find that voice if you haven't already. So I will take you back to film Rianne. Maybe insert transition here, maybe not, because I'm not that skilled at using Premiere. So that was a crash course into creating character biographies for video games. I know that was a lot. This is probably going to be the longest Dev Talk and Tea that I've done so far, but let me know what you think. I really hope that was helpful, whether you're new to games or writing, or whether you are a veteran and you just kind of stumbled across this video. I hope you at least took something from this. This is genuinely a format that I currently use. Some things I take out when it's not necessary, but this is my preferred method right now. It has changed over the years and I'm sure it will change again. But either way, thank you very much for stopping by this Dev Talk and Tea. I am back at Empire this week, so the next video you see will likely be a LARP themed video. So I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!